The scent of lemon oil and old money clung to the air, a combination so distinct it felt like a signature. Lena ran a soft cloth over the polished ebony surface of the grand piano, her reflection a distorted smudge in the perfect gleam. In this house, everything had a place, and her place was in the shadows, a ghost with a dust rag and a spray bottle. She was an expert in being invisible, a skill learned out of necessity. The men who moved through these halls wore silence like a second skin, their bespoke suits sharp enough to cut. They never looked at her, and that was how she wanted it. Her agency had warned her. The client at the Shinjuku penthouse was particular, demanding, high profile. They hadn't said he was the head of the Koryakai, the most powerful Yakuza clan in Tokyo. Lena had figured that out on her own, from the deference in the other staff's eyes, the way men with scars on their knuckles bowed when he entered a room. And from him, Tatsuya Ishikawa. She had only ever seen him in glimpses. A flash of a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. The severe line of his jaw as he took a phone call on the veranda overlooking the glittering city. The hypnotic crawl of a dragon tattoo, all black ink and shadow, that disappeared beneath the starched white collar of his shirt. He moved like the world owed him space, and the world always paid its debt. Tonight, the mansion was alive. Not with warmth, but with a brittle, high-stakes energy. It was a family gathering. Men who looked like older, harder versions of Tatsuya and women in silk kimonos whose smiles never reached their eyes filled the main hall. Lena's job was to remain unseen, collecting empty glasses and ensuring no speck of dust dared to settle. Then the music stopped. The hired pianist, a pale, nervous young man, had been playing classical pieces for an hour. Now he was gone, escorted out by two of the silent men after a whispered, urgent conversation. A murmur went through the guests. An elderly man with eyes like chips of obsidian, Tatsuya's father, she presumed, shot a look of pure displeasure at his son. It was a crack in the perfect facade of the evening. A failure. Tatsuya's gaze swept the room, cold and assessing. It was a predator's gaze, looking for a solution, not an excuse. It landed on his head of staff, a man named Oda. The replacement is 10 minutes out, Oda murmured, bowing slightly. That is 9 minutes too long. Tatsuya's voice was low, yet it cut through the nervous chatter. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience. His father said something sharp in Japanese, the tone a clear reprimand. Tatsuya's jaw tightened. It was the first time Lena had ever seen him look anything less than perfectly in control. Then, Oda made a fatal mistake. He remembered a stray detail from Lena's employment file. He turned, his eyes finding her where she hovered near the doorway, a phantom in her simple black uniform. "Sir," he said, his voice hesitant. "The cleaner." Her file mentioned she has a classical piano certification. Every head turned. 100 pairs of eyes landed on her, and the invisibility she had so carefully cultivated evaporated. It felt like being skinned alive. The silence in the room became a physical weight, pressing down, suffocating her. Tatsuya's eyes found hers. They were dark, unreadable, and utterly devoid of warmth. He didn't see a person. He saw a tool. A solution to his immediate problem. "Play," he said. It was not a request. It was a command, as simple and absolute as gravity. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Sir, I only clean. I haven't played in years." "That was not a question," he stated, his voice dropping even lower, a thread of something dangerous weaving into it. The air grew cold. To refuse him here, in front of his family, was not an option. It was an act of defiance he would not tolerate. She understood that with chilling certainty. Oda gave her a desperate, pleading look. Her survival, and perhaps his, depended on her next move. She walked forward, each step an eternity. The plush carpet muffled her footsteps, but in the dead silence, it felt like she was marching to her own execution. The polished wood of the piano was cool beneath her trembling fingertips. She sat on the bench, her back ramrod straight, facing the keys and the sea of expectant, hostile faces beyond. What could she play? The classical pieces she once knew felt like strangers to her now, their notes faded and forgotten. Panic clawed at her throat. Her mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by fear. And then, from the deepest part of her memory, a melody surfaced. It wasn't classical. It wasn't learned. It was simply there. A sad, simple tune she had hummed to herself on lonely nights for as long as she could remember. A ghost of a song with no name and no origin, yet it was the only thing that felt like her own. She took a shaky breath and placed her fingers on the ivory keys. She closed her eyes and let the melody flow out. It started softly, a string of hesitant, melancholic notes that seemed to hang in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. It was a song of loss, of a childhood afternoon, and the scent of rain on summer asphalt. It built slowly, a quiet crescendo of longing, a story told without words. It was the most honest thing she had. She was so lost in the music, in the strange, familiar comfort of it, that she didn't notice the change in the room. She didn't see the murmur stop. She didn't see every eye fix not on her, but on the man standing by the fireplace. When she played the final, lingering chord, letting it fade into the oppressive silence, she finally opened her eyes and looked at him. Tatsuya Ishikawa had not moved. He stood frozen, his hand halfway to the glass of whiskey on the mantel. His face, usually an impenetrable mask of cold control, was stripped bare. All the power, all the menace, was gone, replaced by a raw, stark shock that was terrifying in its intensity. His eyes were locked on her, but he wasn't seeing a cleaner. He was seeing a ghost. The moment stretched, thin and fragile. His father started to speak, but Tatsuya raised a single hand, a gesture that silenced the entire room instantly. He took a step forward, then another. The sound of his leather shoes on the marble floor was the only sound in the universe. He stopped a few feet from the piano. His voice, when he spoke, was a ragged whisper she barely recognized. "Where," he asked, the word broken, "did you learn that song?" The party was over. Tatsuya dismissed everyone with a single, sharp gesture. His family, the clan elders, the silent men in suits, they all filed out, casting confused and wary glances at the small cleaning woman still sitting at the grand piano. The great hall, once filled with tense energy, became a cavern of echoing silence. Oda was the last to leave, bowing low and avoiding her eyes before pulling the heavy doors shut behind him. They were alone. Lena's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. The air was thick with a tension, so profound it felt hard to breathe. He had moved from his spot a few feet away, just stood there, watching her, the mask of the Yakuza boss completely gone, replaced by something fractured and dangerous. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice regaining its steel but threaded with an unfamiliar roughness. "I don't know," she whispered, the truth sounding flimsy even to her own ears. "I've always known it. I don't remember learning it." He moved then, circling the piano slowly, like a wolf studying its prey. The scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp like cedar and smoke, reached her. He stopped behind her, and she felt the heat of his body at her back, a silent, menacing pressure. "That is not possible," he said, his voice low and close to her ear. She flinched. That song was not written for public ears. It was written for one person. And she is dead. The finality in his voice sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't just a song to him. It was a eulogy. A wound. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know. I can leave." "You are not going anywhere." He moved back into her line of sight, his face now a carefully controlled slate, but his eyes were still burning with that raw, unsettled light. "You will stay here, in this house, until I have an answer." It was not a request. It was a verdict. She was no longer staff. She was a puzzle he intended to solve, a piece of his past that had inexplicably appeared in his present. She was his prisoner. For the next 2 days, Lena lived in a gilded cage. She was given a guest suite with silk sheets and a view of the city that could make you weep, but the door was guarded. She ate meals brought on a tray by a silent maid who wouldn't meet her gaze. The silence of the mansion was different now. It was watchful. Tatsuya was a phantom, unseen, but his presence was everywhere. Oda brought her a change of clothes, simple, elegant pieces that felt alien on her skin. He looked at her with a mixture of fear and pity. "What does he want from me?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Answers," Oda said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "The boss, he has not been himself since that night." That music disturbed something old. Oda bowed and left, leaving her with the weight of that word. Disturbed. On the third night, she was woken by the sound of her door opening. Tatsuya stood silhouetted in the doorway, the city lights painting a halo around his severe frame. He was not wearing a suit, but a simple black shirt and trousers. Without the armor of his position, he looked younger and somehow more dangerous. "Come with me," he ordered. He led her not to an interrogation room, but back to the main hall, to the piano. The room was dark, lit only by a single lamp that cast long, dancing shadows. "Play it again," he said. Her fingers felt stiff and clumsy. She looked at him, at the rigid set of his shoulders, the tension coiled in his body. She saw not just a crime boss, but a man haunted by a memory. A strange, inexplicable empathy bloomed in her chest. She had her own ghosts, her own blank spaces where memories should be. Maybe this was something she could understand. She began to play. The melody filled the silent hall, even sadder in the darkness. He didn't watch her face this time. His gaze was fixed on her hands as they moved over the keys. When the last note faded, he was silent for a long moment. "Her name was Hannah," he said, his voice flat, as if speaking of a stranger. "We grew up together. Her family were associates of my father. She wrote that song for me, for my 16th birthday. A week later, there was an attack. A betrayal from a rival family. They targeted our homes. She was gone. They never found her." He spoke of it like a business transaction that had gone wrong, but Lena could hear the carefully buried pain beneath the surface. The woman he failed to protect. The shame he carried. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. He finally looked at her, his eyes searching her face, looking for a flicker of recognition, a sign that she was lying. "You have her hands," he said, his voice a low murmur. "They move on the keys just like she did." He stepped closer, his body caging her in against the piano. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch surprisingly gentle, hesitant. It was a stark contrast to the violence she knew he was capable of. His thumb brushed over her bottom lip. The contact was electric, a jolt of heat in the cold room. Her breath hitched. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken history and a dangerous, burgeoning present. His eyes held hers, and for a heartbeat, she saw a flicker of something other than suspicion. Something like desperate hope. It was more terrifying than his anger. That was the moment she could have pulled away, could have screamed, could have fought. But she didn't. She stayed perfectly still, caught in the gravity of his grief and the impossible question in his eyes. She made a choice, not with her mind, but with her stillness. She chose to stay. She had to know what happened to the girl who wrote the song, even if it meant unearthing a past that could destroy them both. The fragile truce shattered the next evening. Tatsuya was in his study, a room of dark wood and leather that smelled of old paper and power, when Oda entered, his face pale. He carried a tablet, holding it out with a trembling hand. "Sir," Oda said, "my apologies for the intrusion. We have been running facial recognition against old family photographs, cross-referencing with the employee's file, as you commanded." Tatsuya took the tablet. On the screen was a grainy photograph, at least a decade old. It showed two children sitting on a porch swing. A young boy with a stern, serious face, already bearing the weight of his future. Unmistakably Tatsuya. Next to him was a little girl with bright eyes and two long braids, her dark skin a beautiful contrast to her white summer dress. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She was smiling. It was Lena. Beneath it was a document. A police report from the night of the attack. It listed the casualties. Hannah Sato, age 10, presumed deceased in the fire that consumed her family's home. But there was a note appended. An officer's addendum. One child was unaccounted for. The American daughter of the family's private tutor who had been visiting for a playdate. Lena Washington, age 10. She was never found. Lost in the chaos. Presumed taken, or worse. Tatsuya stared at the screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the tablet. He wasn't the boy who lost his first love. He was the boy who lost his best friend, the girl who had been in the wrong place at the worst possible time. The song wasn't from a lover. It was from a friend. A secret shared between two children from different worlds. A promise to always remember. And he had forgotten her face, remembered only the melody she had taught him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The silence in the study was absolute. At that exact moment, the world exploded. A concussive blast rocked the penthouse, shattering the floor-to-ceiling windows. Glass rained down like deadly diamonds. Alarms blared, a shrill scream that tore through the quiet. Lena, who had been in the adjoining library, was thrown to the floor. Shouts erupted in the hallway. The sharp, unmistakable crack of gunfire followed. They were under attack. Before she could process what was happening, Tatsuya was there. He moved through the chaos with a terrifying, lethal grace. He hauled her to her feet, his grip like iron on her arm. "Stay behind me," he snarled, his eyes scanning the room, all trace of the haunted man gone, replaced by the cold, calculating leader of the Kuryakai. Men in black suits, his men, formed a perimeter, guns drawn. But the attackers were already inside. A rival clan, the Hashimoto Gumi, making a play for his territory. And they knew exactly where to hit him. They had seen his reaction at the party. They had seen his weakness. They had seen her. A grenade arced through the broken window, landing on the priceless Persian rug. Tatsuya reacted without thinking. He shoved Lena behind a heavy oak desk, his body shielding hers as the device detonated. The force of the blast threw them against the wall. The air filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. Her ears rang, a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. Through the ringing, she felt a wet warmth spreading across her arm. She looked down. It was Tatsuya's blood. A piece of shrapnel was embedded in his shoulder, a dark, ugly wound. He grunted, pushing himself up, his gun already in his hand, his face a mask of grim determination. He was ready to keep fighting, even while bleeding out. He was losing too much blood. His movements were becoming sluggish. In that moment, watching him falter, Lena felt a switch flip inside her. The passive cleaner, the frightened prisoner, was gone. "The bookshelf," she yelled over the din of battle. "It's a false back. I saw the hinges when I was dusting." Tatsuya's eyes flickered to where she was pointing, then back to her, a spark of surprise in their dark depths. He gave a sharp nod to Oda, who slammed his hand against a carved panel. A section of the library wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. "Go," Tatsuya ordered his men, providing cover fire. He pushed Lena toward the opening. But as he turned to follow, a Hashimoto soldier appeared in the smoke, his gun leveled at Tatsuya's head. There was no time. Tatsuya was too slow, his injured arm failing him. Lena didn't think. She acted. She grabbed a heavy, bronze bookend from the desk and threw it with all her might. It struck the gunman's hand, sending his shot wide, the bullet screaming past Tatsuya's ear. That 1-second distraction was all Tatsuya needed. He moved, a blur of motion, and the threat was neutralized with 2 precise, silent shots. He stumbled back into the secret passage, Otis sealing the wall behind them. They were safe, for now, plunged into darkness. Tatsuya slumped against the wall, breathing heavily, his hand clamped over his bleeding shoulder. Lena ripped a strip of fabric from the hem of her dress. "Let me see," she commanded, her voice firm, surprising them both. He resisted for a moment, then relented, his strength failing. She pressed the makeshift bandage against the wound, applying pressure. Her hands were steady. In the cramped, dark space, His breath was hot against her cheek. His blood was warm on her skin. She had crossed a line. She had actively participated in his violent world. She had chosen a side. His side. He looked at her, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The sounds of the firefight were muffled now, distant. "Lena," he said, her name a rough, pained sound. He reached up with his good hand, not to push her away, but to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. The song. It was a promise that we wouldn't forget. I broke it. It was the most honest thing he had ever said. It was a confession of failure, of a guilt he had carried for a decade. "I didn't remember the promise," she whispered, her own confession. "But I never forgot the song." The enemy was not content with a failed assault. They now knew Tatsuya's weakness had a name, and it was Lena. The next attack was not on his fortress, but on her past. 2 days later, while they were holed up in a secure safe house, a sleek black car pulled up to the small, run-down apartment she had once called home. Her landlady, a kind older woman who had always given her extra rice cakes, was found dead. It was a message written in blood. No one connected to her was safe. The life she had known was not just gone, it was being systematically erased. The news hit Lena like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. This was her fault. Her existence had put innocent people in danger. Tatsuya found her curled up on a sofa, her body racked with silent sobs. He didn't offer platitudes or comfort. He simply sat in a chair across from her, his presence a silent, solid weight in the room, his arm now professionally bandaged and in a sling. He waited. When her tears subsided, he spoke, his voice quiet but absolute. "This ends tonight." His plan was surgical and brutal. The Hashimoto boss, a man named Kenji, would be attending a private affair at a traditional tea house in Kyoto. Security would be high, but predictable. Tatsuya's men had an infiltration plan, but it was risky. The final stage required getting close to Kenji, closer than any armed soldier could manage. "He will not be expecting a woman," Tatsuya stated, looking at Lena. "And he will not be expecting you." He wasn't asking her to be bait. He was offering her a role in her own revenge. It was a dark, terrifying choice. To retreat into the role of a victim, or to step forward and become a weapon. She thought of her landlady, of the life that had been stolen from her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, something harder was taking shape. Anger. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice steady. The climax was a symphony of quiet violence. Lena, dressed in an elegant kimono, her hair pinned up, moved through the tea house like a phantom. She was just another server, invisible. She had learned well. Tatsuya and his men were shadows, eliminating Kenji's security from the outside in a slow, silent strangulation. Lena's role was simple. Get into Kenji's private room and plant a listening device. But as she slid the paper screen door open, balancing a tray of sake, she saw that the plan had already gone wrong. Kenji was not alone. He had Oda, Tatsuya's most trusted man, on his knees, a knife to his throat. A mole had betrayed them. Kenji smiled, a predator's grin. "Ishikawa's pet," he purred, his eyes landing on Lena. "He sent you to do his dirty work? How disappointing." There was no escape. Tatsuya was too far away. His men couldn't get there in time. Oda looked at her, his eyes filled with grim acceptance. He was ready to die. But Lena saw something they didn't. She had spent weeks cleaning Tatsuya's mansion, learning its secrets. She had also cleaned this very tea house under her old agency. She knew its architecture. She knew about the antique samurai armor displayed in the corner of the room. And she knew, from a conversation she'd overheard between maintenance workers, that its lacquered breastplate was loose. She bowed deeply, her movements fluid and submissive. "My deepest apologies for the intrusion," she murmured, setting the tray down on the low table between them. As she rose, her hand brushed against a small, decorative vase. She fumbled it, sending it crashing to the floor near the display. "Clumsy girl," Kenji sneered, distracted for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She lunged, not for him, but for the armor. She ripped the heavy breastplate from its stand and swung it like a shield, slamming it into the side of Kenji's head. He staggered back with a cry of pain, his grip on Oda loosening. Oda exploded into action, disarming Kenji's guard. In the same motion, Lina brought the sharp edge of the armor down on Kenji's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife. The paper screen door slid open. Tatsuya stood there, his gun silent and steady in his hand. His eyes were not on the defeated Kenji, but on Lina, standing over him, her chest heaving, the antique armor clutched in her hands like a weapon. She had not been rescued. She had created the opening. She had saved his man. She had saved him. The aftermath was quiet. The war was over. The Hashimoto Gumi was broken, its leader taken. A cost had been paid in blood and loyalty, but Tatsuya's empire was secure. Her old life was a ghost, completely and irrevocably gone. They stood on the veranda of his penthouse, the shattered windows now replaced, the city a river of light below them. The air was cool against her skin. She was no longer wearing a cleaner's uniform or a borrowed kimono. She wore a simple black dress that was her own. Tatsuya came to stand beside her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a tangible thing, a promise of safety and danger all at once. He held out his hand. In his palm lay a small, tarnished silver locket. He opened it. On one side was a tiny, faded picture of him as a boy. On the other, a picture of her, the smiling girl with the braids. "My mother gave this to me, to give to the person I would protect with my life," he said, his voice low. I thought I had failed. He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes were completely clear, holding nothing but a raw, undeniable truth. "I lost you once, Lina. It will not happen again. You belong here. With me." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. A claim. He placed the locket in her hand, his fingers closing over hers. His skin was warm. She looked down at the locket, then back out at the sprawling darkness of Tokyo, a city built on power and secrets. His world. She felt the weight of the silver in her palm, a link to a past she barely remembered and a key to a future she never could have imagined. She didn't look away from the darkness, his or the city's. She had made her choice in a room filled with violence, armed with a piece of history. She curled her fingers around the locket, its metal cool against her skin. The melody had been the memory of a ghost. Now it was the overture to her life.